Welcome back to Hypercar Updates, the series where we take 10 topics and break them down in order to discuss everything regarding Hypercar and GTP. In this episode, I will discuss topics such as the extension of the LMH and LMDh regulations, an updated look at Cadillac's future team options, the potential return of Vanwall to the WEC, and of course, so much more will be expanded upon in episode 12 of Hypercar Updates. One of the biggest news stories from the recent months was the topic of the extension of the LMH and LMDh regulations till at least 2029. This now means that the Hypercar and GTP categories of the WEC and IMSA will be sticking around for a while, and extending the regulations till at least 2029 is proof that LMH and LMDh have been very successful. Statistically, the regulations have boosted the popularity of the WEC and IMSA. When it comes to the different variety of manufacturers, with 13 committing to the regulations so far, a number we haven't come close to since the Group C days of the 1980s and early 90s. The extension gives concrete information that these fantastic regulations are here to stay. When speaking about the LMH and LMDh extension, IMSA President John Doonan said, "This is important for the manufacturers involved from a stability point of view, but it also creates opportunities for manufacturers looking at potentially coming into the GTP class." As Doonan mentioned, this extension gives opportunities for more manufacturers to join, and that perfectly transitions into the next subject, because Hyundai is a manufacturer that is heavily rumored to join the WEC and IMSA, and could announce their plans to join very soon. Hyundai is one of the manufacturers now increasingly more interested in joining, following the extension of the regulations of LMH and LMDh. The Korean automaker could join with an LMDh prototype as soon as 2026, and there is already some key information pointing to the potential project. Hyundai is rumored to be picking Orica as their mandatory chassis supplier, and the potential LMDh could use a Pipo Motors engine, which is a company that Hyundai has worked with before, and Pipo Motors have also supplied an engine to a hypercar entry in the past, in the form of the Glickenhaus SCG-007, which raced in the WEC until 2023. Hyundai is the leading contender when it comes to the next manufacturer to commit to these regulations. And the possible internals of this car are not the only thing being reported. The American squad Chip Ganassi Racing, who recently parted ways with Cadillac, is a potential candidate to be a team to run the Hyundai entries in the WEC and IMSA, if of course a program starts. Speaking of new hypercars, one that will be for sure joining in 2025 is the Aston Martin Valkyrie LMH, which recently began testing in preparation for its debut next year. American team, the Heart of Racing, which will run the hypercars in both the WEC and IMSA next year, took to the track at both the Silverstone circuit and later on for an official test at Donington Park. A 2-day test session was conducted at Donington Park, with Darren Turner, Mario Farnbacher, and Harry Tinknell taking driving duties in the Valkyrie LMH. Aston Martin's new Le Mans hypercar also had a productive test, with over 300 miles or 482 kilometers completed at the Leicestershire-based racing circuit. The car looks and sounds great, and I can't wait to see it when it hits the track for racing in 2025. Now, when it comes to 2025, we still don't know exactly what teams will be running the Cadillac V Series R next year. However, we do have some updated information. I'm expecting to see 5 Cadillacs competing full-time across the WEC and IMSA in 2025, and here's why. Now that Wayne Taylor Racing with Andretti has parted ways with Acura, it's all but confirmed that they will link up with Cadillac in IMSA. All signs point to WTR and Cadillac reuniting for the first time since 2020, when WTR ran a Cadillac in DPI. Wayne Taylor Racing is heavily rumored to run 2 Cadillacs in 2025, and with Action Express Racing also planning to continue with their Wheeling Cadillac, I expect to see 3 Cadillacs on the grid, which means an additional V Series R will be on the IMSA grid. Now, as for the WEC, the most likely scenario is that Hertz Team Jota will pick up where Chip Ganassi Racing left off and run 2 Cadillacs full-time. With limited space available for next year, and Hertz Team Jota having the opportunity to jump into the Manufacturers' Championship, it's definitely possible that they will make the switch from Porsche, where they run 2 963s, to running 2 Cadillacs next season. Speaking of space, that has been a major talking point recently. Not so much in IMSA GTP, but in WEC Hypercar. And this is because of the new 2-car mandate rule for 2025. For next year, all manufacturers in Hypercar will need to run 2 cars in the WEC. The rule does not apply to customer teams such as Proton Competition running a customer Porsche 963, but this situation could affect them. Now, this rule does not affect manufacturers like Porsche, Ferrari, Peugeot, and so on, who are already running 2 cars in the championship, but what this does mean is that Cadillac, Lamborghini, and Isotta Fraschini will all need to double up with 2 full-time entries next season. Thankfully, all 3 manufacturers mentioned are planning to bring 2 cars next season, and Aston Martin will also be bringing 2 of their Valkyrie LMH prototypes next season. However, this means that an additional 5 hypercars at least would be on the grid, which would bring the total to 42 next season, and the WEC is set not to expand beyond 40 cars. In my opinion, this will ultimately affect some of the customer cars, and we may see less of them for next season. But that's a subject for another topic in this video later on. Now, a topic that I really wanted to bring up is that Vanwall are looking to make a return to the WEC. Vanwall last competed in the World Endurance Championship in 2023 with their Vanderwall 680 Le Mans Hypercar, and unfortunately, they were rejected from the 2024 entry list. Vanwall's WEC participation was also controversial, considering the legal issues surrounding the Vanwall name and because the team was technically bicallous. The Vanderwall 680 also didn't perform well, with a DNF at the 24 Hours of Le Mans and other disappointing results. However, Vanwall are still interested in making a comeback to the WEC in 2025. The last major news we heard on the Vanderwall 680 was when the car was set to go through some major changes that included a switch from using a Gibson V8 to using a Pipo Motors engine. And it's a good sign that Vanwall are looking to return to the WEC as early as next year. Although, as I mentioned before, the 2025 grid has extremely limited space, and if Vanwall were to join, they would likely need to enter 2 hypercars into the championship. So even if Vanwall were ready to make a return in 2025, getting on the grid would still be difficult. But I'm definitely interested to see if Vanwall can make a return, and I will for sure cover any further news on it. Continuing the subject of 2025, and we know that silly season continues to be entertaining for both Hypercar and GTP, with some driver changes already announced. For IMSA, we know of course that there will be some changes for Renger van der Zande and Sebastian Bourdais, with Chip Ganassi Racing splitting from Cadillac. And we also know that drivers such as Tom Blomqvist will likely make a return to Meyer-Shank Racing, as the team is returning to running Acura ARX06 entries. But the biggest driver announcement thus far is that of Pipo Derani. The Brazilian racer is leaving Action Express Racing after 2024. The team he has found so much success with since joining forces in 2019 will need to make a change for 2025. It's rumored that F2 champion Felipe Drugovich, who raced for the team at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, could be Jack Aitken's teammate next year in IMSA. And as for Pipo Derani, it's possible that he could land a drive with Acura in 2025, or, as recently reported by Sportscar 365, move to a different series, in the case of the World Endurance Championship, potentially landing a drive in the Hypercar class. As for the WEC, besides the new entries, we know for sure that Nico Mueller will be leaving Peugeot, with reserve driver Malte Jakobsen joining the team as his replacement. Now, because of the limited space on the 2025 Hypercar grid, as I explained, customer entries could be affected. When it comes to the customer cars, I would expect to see the number 83 AF Corsa Ferrari still on the grid, but it really depends on Hertz Team Jota. I would expect to see them make the switch to Cadillac next year, and that would mean 2 Porsche 963s would be available. Those 2 Porsche chassis would likely go over to IMSA and be spread apart to 2 different teams. One of the Porsches would likely go to Proton competition for a second IMSA entry, and the other would go to JDC Miller for a second entry in IMSA. This would line up perfectly with the planned 22 car field in Hypercar next season. And with 18 entries in LMGT3, this would bring the list to 40 cars, the exact number that the organizers wanted. Moving on to the questions from you, the viewers. Our first question comes from Lobster of Doom, who asks, any chance of cars like the RB17 and AMG-One committing to endurance racing? It did happen to the Valkyrie, so slight chance? While this is a promising prospect, the short answer is that I don't think the Mercedes AMG-One or RedBull RB17 will make it to the Hypercar class. While these prototypes are hypercars, they are structured very differently to the LMH and LMDh prototypes that we are used to seeing in endurance races. The Mercedes AMG-One and RedBull RB17 would need to be changed in order for them to compete, and therefore comply with the regulations. Plus, there is the fact that the organizations of Mercedes and Red Bull don't have that much interest in the hypercar categories as of this time. Mercedes and Red Bull seem to be focusing the majority of their attention on their respective Formula One plans, and when it comes to the constructor of Mercedes, they are focusing on their road car sales, and for endurance racing, their AMG GT3 is still participating across the world in series such as IMSA and the 24 Hours of Nürburgring, for example. So while it would be super cool to see the AMG-One and RB17 in the championship, I don't think that's something that either Mercedes or Red Bull plan on doing. On to the next question, which comes from John Vandeventer. Do you think IMSA should abolish the 2,500 road car rule? Now, for those unaware, this rule is for IMSA's GTP class, which states that all manufacturers entering must produce 2,500 road cars per year in order to compete. This rule is good in the way that it likely gives certainty that manufacturers have the resources to enter GTP, but it also brings some issues, and one of those issues is that it can turn away brands wanting to join. For example, back when the program was around, Glickenhaus was interested in joining IMSA with their SCG-007 Le Mans Hypercar, and arguably they had the ability to compete in the events, especially considering that they are based in the USA. However, the boutique American company couldn't join because of this rule, and in my opinion, that was a tragedy, especially considering the fact that an American brand, in this case Glickenhaus, was interested in entering a Le Mans Hypercar into IMSA, a prototype we had not seen in the IMSA GTP class thus far. Now, to be clear, this rule also affects brands like Vanwall and Isotta Fraschini from joining IMSA, but their programs seem to be centered on the WEC only. So the biggest loss from this rule being in place was that Glickenhaus was effectively turned away. Ultimately, I do see the pros and cons from the rule being in place within IMSA GTP. However, I do feel it should be removed, or at least the requirement should be reduced in some way. So that completes episode 12 of Hypercar Updates. Out of all the subjects covered, which one interested you the most? Well, as always, let me know all your thoughts down in the comments section. Thanks for watching. For more content on endurance racing such as the WEC and IMSA, consider subscribing if you haven't already. On screen, you'll find some suggested videos to watch next. For now though, that's it for me. You'll hear from me next in the following video.